Good morning, everyone. Archbishop Richard Gagnon here. This is our Friday morning report, and thank you for joining us. Our Friday morning reports from the Catholic Center in Winnipeg is a way by which I can communicate with our people in the Archdiocese and sometimes beyond, and also to receive questions and concerns during these days of the pandemic, so to cover a number of different topics. I mentioned last Friday's report that I would talk a little bit about two conferences we had last week that I couldn't include in the Friday report because of the timing. The first one was a national consultation with Dr. Theresa Tam, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Canada, and she was online on a Zoom call with the Associate Deputy Minister of Health, Harpreet Koshar, and also we had Sharif Abdou, the Executive Director of Public Health Agency of Canada. And so the idea was to provide information about the vaccines in Canada to the faith leaders, because the belief is, of course, is that the faith leaders know their regions very well, and they can be of assistance in the rollout of the vaccination program. And so what I'll do this morning is simply go through a few notes with you from that provide some information about the vaccination program in our country. This was organized through the Canadian Council of Churches, the Canadian Multi-Faith Federation, and the Canadian Interfaith Conversation Group, of which the CCCB is a member. Dr. Tam stressed that the vaccine rollout success depends very much on two things: on the work of the government and also on the grassroots level. And in this case, the faith communities, which are very numerous across the country. A large number of people are connected to their faith communities. And so it's a 50-50 kind of collaboration or partnership that way. With regards to the federal vaccination approval, well, there may be risks associated with the vaccine. For example, sometimes there's certain allergic reactions. The benefits, of course, greatly outweigh the risks, and it is through the vaccination program that we're going to be able to move past the pandemic, and so that's why it's very important. There's always a tiny risk of some reactions on the part of certain individuals, but that's the same with all vaccinations, I understand. Educational resources on the development of the vaccine and different ways to communicate the information on the safety and the efficacy are provided in a special website entitled Canada.ca. Canada.ca. It's a portal that provides information on the question of vaccines and other pandemic-related issues. The current status of the vaccination program in Canada: vaccine supply is limited at first and is already experiencing some delays, as we've heard about in the news. And so this is something that is present right now in Canada. Hopefully that'll be ameliorated quickly. It's also a factor in Europe, as far as I understand. So there is that factor, and hopefully that barrier, that difficulty in distribution because of supply will be overcome. The first stage of the program includes adults 70 years or older, and includes those in close contact with them, caregivers and healthcare staff. Now, it has been raised by myself, by a few others, about our religious ministers who go into institutions, that they should have priority in the vaccination program. And of course, that same advocacy is coming from other sectors of society outside of the religious communities. So far, I have nothing to announce about that. We will stick with this. It is the first responders in the medical field, healthcare staff at the present time, and then following that, those adults over 70 years of age. The next level, the goal is to have the majority of Canadians vaccinated by September 2021. That's the goal. It looks like it's on course. We'll have to see. Public Health Canada is monitoring the success, And finally, at this time, it is not known if those vaccinated can transmit the virus. That there's still more to be learned in terms of the virus, and as far as that's concerned. This is an area of current research and requires those vaccinated to continue following the public health measures. So even though the vaccines are coming out in Canada, masking, social distancing, sanitization will remain for quite a while. A few considerations from Dr. Tam. She outlined 3 call to action areas for us. And again, she's speaking to faith leaders from coast to coast in Canada. The responsibility of sharing credible and factual information from the federal, provincial, local public health authorities. There's a lot of misinformation out there, so it's incumbent upon civic leaders, religious leaders, others in society to make sure the information is authentic and true. So that's important. And I think for us listening today to this Friday morning report, we must make sure that our source of information is not only from social media sites and commentary, because we know that that's subject to a certain amount of bias or misinformation at the same time. A second point she makes is that we must continue to stay vigilant in maintaining public health measures such as physical distancing, hand hygiene, staying at home, etc., etc. So even though, as I said before, the vaccine is rolling out, we continue to go through those various guidelines and safety procedures until we learn otherwise. And finally, continue to provide spiritual care in creative and innovative ways for your faith communities. Faith communities are an essential pillar of society, Dr. Tam says, especially during this pandemic, which builds resilience for those in the faith community. So again, during the red code that we're now on, Code Red in Manitoba, for example, we know that personal contact is difficult, but our social media outreach, also the use of telephones and some physical outreaching is being done. And I encourage our parishes to continue to move along those lines. Communication is so very important in this whole issue. For any faith-based communities that wish to assist with the practical implementation of the vaccine program, one can offer their facilities. So far, the distribution of the vaccine is confined to certain areas, institutions at the present time, designated areas, but there is a possibility when the request comes that some of our faith-based institutions, buildings, could be used for the vaccine distribution as well. So that will be announced in due course. In terms of the vaccine itself, Dr. Tam reiterated that the ingredients of the vaccine are publicly disclosed. So there's some controversy about the ingredients that go into the development of vaccines. And she made one point that the 2 vaccines currently approved in Canada, which are the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, are not obtained or developed from cell lines from aborted fetuses. So those 2 are certainly ethically possible for Christians to use. So we look forward to that. I'm very happy in Canada that those 2 vaccines are the ones that are being used and being asked for in terms of supply chains. Final point, closing message in that faith conference is that our faith communities offer hope and place to wonder and explore what this pandemic might teach us. The faith communities help people to cope, find meaning in this time of suffering, find meaning in this time of isolation and challenge that we're living in. So it was an affirmation of the faith communities in Canada, but also too, it was the need on the part of the government to recognize that faith communities are important in this whole rollout of the vaccination program in Canada. So I hope you found some of this of interest, this short kind of display or explanation of that coast-to-coast meeting with the Chief Medical Officer in Canada. We also had last week a conference, as I mentioned, given by Father Stephen Kapler, the President and Chief Psychologist at Southdown Institute in Ontario. And it had to do with a conference he gave to our clergy, our priests, and our deacons. And there's a lot of useful information here It would take me a whole hour to go through everything, but a couple of things that were mentioned in that conference, simply that we all are experiencing a tremendous change in our life, of course, and on many different levels. And everything has changed as if somebody suddenly pulled the plug on our way of life. We've all experienced that. Life as we know it has changed. It's all very different. And there is a certain amount of uncertainty in our future. So we have many, many worries. The conference explored the worries that people have at the family level, the employment level, health, security, everyday things we normally do. What can I do? What can I do? What can I not do? So many uncertainties and many challenges. And it's important to name those things. In the conference, we explored that together with Father Kapler. And that you would have to be living under a rock not to notice that life has changed drastically, and it's all around us. And so we spoke a lot about trauma. Now, sometimes we think about trauma as something that occurs in our life because of some major accident or something that's happened in our life, and we're affected by that, and that is true, of course. But there's also different types of trauma. Trauma is often, but not always, associated with being present at the site. We can experience trauma indirectly. We can experience trauma vicariously through the news media, for example, observing the progress of the pandemic around the world and the worries that people have. We're all subject to this. And trauma, in this particular case of the pandemic, can be a kind of a slow-moving reality that catches up with us, has an effect on us. Some of the things that trauma produces is fatigue. There's a pandemic fatigue, a compassion fatigue. Our patience is wearing off. Our stamina is running out. These kind of things wear us down. It's the result of a trauma we are experiencing from a great change in our life that's out of our control. The global crisis also equals trauma. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible, overwhelming negative event, like an accident, as I said, or some other kind of thing in our life. It's also possible to sustain trauma after witnessing something from a distance, as we see in this particular case of the pandemic, as a secondary traumatic stress, an indirect exposure. Chronic media exposure amplifies the impact of the traumatic distress. I mentioned in one of our Friday reports that because there's so much time spent at home, the consumption of media has gone up considerably, and of course that also increases trauma. Much of that is social media or cable news around the world of different places. We're sort of indirectly exposed to this. We must be very careful about that and understand the influences that are coming upon us. The stress management skills, we talked about managing this kind of stress in our lives. Recognizing what I have no control over in my life right now, but also recognizing what I do have control over. In the case of media, the media coverage, the media content, we have no control over that. That has a life of its own, of course, and we're very familiar with that. But the consumption of the media, the sources of the media, the screen time, the amount of time we spend on the media, that's under our control. And so during this time of pandemic, we do have a measure of control that we should pay close attention to. Some of the coping mechanisms would take a long time to cover that this morning, but a useful little tool is the reference to a now deceased psychologist, Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor. He wrote a little book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's a very famous little book, and he talks about trauma and what he observed in his experience in the concentration camps. He says that there's a space between the event, the stimulus that affects us, and our response. There's a space between the event of the trauma and our response. In between, there's a space there. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Our freedom lies with the way that we respond to that which affects us, that which we have no control over, and that which we do have control over. and in dealing with the question of coping mechanisms, to seek in our life a balance in our physical activity, a balance in terms of our understanding that our relationships with others is important, even though it may be over social media, etc., and the responsibilities we have in reaching out to others. Social support, isolation, and a sense of loneliness are factors that can contribute to depression, anxiety, and other problems in our life. What does social support really change? Well, social support either that we have received from others and that we give to others, that I'm not alone, I have not been abandoned, I am not the only person in this situation. A sense of solidarity and a sense of community. Our spirituality is very key in this. As I mentioned earlier in the discussion with the national conference with Dr. Tam, to help us find meaning in our situation that we're living through today and that balance in our life. And so we had tremendous reviews from our clergy with this conference with Dr. Stephen Kapler, and very encouraging. So just wanted to share that with you this morning. A couple of these points that were mentioned may find a certain resonance in your life, in my life, that is helpful at this time. So I'm very thankful for having had that experience of these two conferences last week, dealing with both the vaccine and the way that we react to the pandemic that we're experiencing. Well, thank you for your patience. I know I went through that rather quickly. It was just to kind of give a bird's eye view of those two conferences last week. And as I said, hopefully something will be of interest to you. On that notion of spirituality, let us remind ourselves that a lot of our Friday reports, and certainly the homilies, all the live streaming being done in the Archdiocese, all of this is meant to help us, in terms of this time of pandemic. And when we talk about the domestic church, living our faith in our families, that's something that is more than just a good idea. On a practical level, it's very important to us. And let us learn from this. Our synod in the Archdiocese stressed the importance of the domestic church and the pandemic. If there's any kind of a bright side in all of this, certainly helping our family life should be one of them. So let us continue to take that seriously in our lives. So this past week, a couple of questions have come through. I'll do my best to answer them. The first question really is one I can't answer very well at this point, but there will be an announcement about it. The question has to do with, it says, how do we proceed with RCIA, the rite of Christian initiation for adults, this Easter? In other words, those entering the church, those to be baptized, confirmed, and receiving Eucharist. Any advice for moving forward? Well, I would really think that this is a very important discussion in our Office of Catechetics, and I know they're listening to this Friday morning broadcast, that we need to be looking into this a little more closely this week, and announcement and information will be given to you. So I'm just going to postpone my response to that. Of course, a lot of this depends on whether or not our churches will be open at Easter. Let's be honest. We know the situation changes. We're doing our best. We're advocating. We're in communication with the government, etc. But a lot depends on the actual zone we're in and what it will look like 2 or 3 months from now. So there will be an answer given on this. A communication will be made. But today is a little bit premature on that. But thank you very much for the question, and we will look at that. Another question would be, presuming that our churches won't be open for public liturgies yet, at least not in a meaningful way, how can we mark Ash Wednesday this year? Again, a similar question, and thank you for that. Will our churches be open on Ash Wednesday? Will there be a small congregation or a larger congregation? If there's no congregations at all, then of course the live streaming of Ash Wednesday Masses will occur in many different corners of the Archdiocese. If there are small congregations, the Holy See has made some announcements as to how ashes can be distributed. And again, information will be given out to you on that point. So very much over the next couple of weeks, we'll have some idea of what the zone situation will be like in Manitoba. So that's on the radar screen. Thank you very much for the question. The final question, are there any updates about your advocacy for the reopening of churches with the provincial government? At this point, the answer to that would be no further updates. I am expecting a further communication from the provincial government, and hopefully next week I'll have something further to announce to you. But right now we remain in the code red zone, and the restrictions remain in place. So we continue our practice of patience, of charity, to be resilient with the Lord's grace at this time. Thank you very much for these questions this past week, and continue to watch our Friday reports and to send in any further questions you may have. I try my very best to follow up on these questions. If there's no answer one week, I do my best to respond the following Friday. Well, may God bless and keep you this coming week, keep you safe, continue to be resilient in your faith and determined to move forward during these challenging times of the pandemic. The Lord be with you all and keep you in his love and peace, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.